afternoon, everybody. Just a brief introduction. I'm Norman Bambridge. In charge of me is Sarah Smith, and our technician is James Nason, who come to record it for us. So we were here about a month ago with an initial presentation on family history, and from the people that came, thank you, we worked out that we can go straight into brick walls where you often get stuck. So today's presentation is about brick walls. The handout will be a copy of what the screen is, what we'll say on the screen, but there's always a but. We'll also tell you where we find out how to get around things as well. So, thank you, Sarah. Right, this is the normal comment. You come to a brick wall, you call it what you may, rabbit warren of too much information. That can also work against you. And so what you have to do, stand back, reflect on your own knowledge, reflect on the information, what you already have, perhaps revisit it to see if it's okay, and then interrogate each part. Proof is at the foremost, and we're going to have a look at each part of that process as well as we go through. So in general, that's the way we'll treat this afternoon's presentation. Just taking a step back, do you all know what the census are? Yeah? Okay, they have evolved, obviously, over each decade that they're produced or taken. They evolved, there are changes. There were census before 1841, but they were really, each 10 years from 1801, they were based on, we need a head count of how many people in the country. And it shows you how far we've got. We now don't know how many people are in the country, but that's another story. So, you know that we have a 100-year publishing rule. So there are certain things that are available officially, but equally they still maintain the fact that you've got a 100-year publishing rule. So you can't always directly go to something that you might need, but there are always ways around that. So I just want to point out the 1921 census, which was the latest census, not very good. And it's accepted it's not very good. You had a First World War, and then you had a worldwide pandemic. So don't hold much hope of it being high percentage correct. And the way that they were done in 1911, so even before, but 1911 in particular, and 1921, the forms were given to the householders. And enumerators were still around, but they were only called on when the householder may have some form of illiteracy. So that's when they all call in an enumerator to come and collect a sheet, a census sheet from a household. Thank you. Right, as I've said, the 1801, 1831 were just simply seeking head counts. So the start of planning a country's existence almost. Now I'm going to jump to 1921, which is exactly what I've said. I know I maybe sound repeating, but it was at the end of a First World War. It was a pandemic going on. So yeah, you may be lucky to get the information, but there's also another little side issue, of course. That's the first census they're actually charging you for. Have any of you gone into the 1921 census for any information? There's a charge for it. So. The 1931 census, I know this is jumping ahead slightly, but unfortunately, that was a very, very high percentage of that was destroyed. Not by bombing, as is first thought in the Second World War, but there was a fire. Simple as that. There was a fire at Kew, and the only saving grace about that is all of the Scottish census records were kept. They were in Edinburgh. So if you've got any Scottish links, you're all right. They're still there. The 1941 census was cancelled. We were in the middle of a Second World War, so there was no census taken. And what they did, I think with quite good foresight, what they said was, we still need a national register. So in 1939, there was a national register. I don't know if you've looked at it, have you at all? Okay, well, it's there. It's quite useful because the way it was taken, everybody is, generally speaking, 100% almost, their dates of birth are shown. So the actual date of birth, marital status shown. That's about it on that one. The reason was it was for identity cards. It was created so identity cards could be issued. And what they then did, and if you've ever seen it, ever looked at it, they've used it and overlaid it. Particularly, you see a lot of green writing, green printing on it, and that's to update it in case there was no 1951 census. So they're just documenting little subtle changes, like there might be a marriage after 1841, and so the surname might have changed for that person. It may be crossed out and a marriage name put in. Little things like that. But it is useful in that context because it leads you on to making the links with all of what you're looking for.
On the 30, why are they taking names out?
Sorry? Oh, closed. Yeah. There's some interesting things thought about that. It's not always official. It's not always official. Some of them are purely where they have people have actually said, I don't want to be recorded. Some have links that link didn't want to be recorded. It's a very curious one because there's always more than one reason. It's not, we don't show them because they're age expired. We don't show them because they're dead. Things like that. Some of the deaths, yes, some are deaths, so they're knocked out. But your point is quite valid because it begets another question. When was that done? When was that entry blacked out and shown as closed? And there's no answer to that. So was it that they're taking it from a prep for 1951? Is there a death between 1941 and 1951 that they're still shown on the 1939 register? There's a myriad of little reasons why they're closed. It doesn't make sense. I agree with you totally. But
for instance, my mother's 39 wasn't there.
Yeah.
Tracing the sisters, that's where she was.
Yeah.
There.
Yeah.
She was still alive.
Of course. Yeah.
She was still alive when I was tracing this information. No reason. The only logical reason I was given is because she worked for the MOD. Traceability.
Yeah.
Up to 1951.
Yeah. I can understand that. That's just another reason. But if you look at some of them, they certainly weren't. That wasn't a link, officialdom wasn't a link. So I'm going to digress because it's the same question I was asked Monday in our office. Joe said, why on one headstone are there two emblems and two names of soldiers killed in the war? And it was a case of saying it was expedient. Simple as that. At the time, they were burying people left, right, and centre, with respect, left, right, and centre. And sometimes they ran out of stone. So they carved two names on one stone. But there are a multitude of reasons. They might be pals. They might have been killed on the same day at the same incident. These two that she showed me were 2 days apart. There are some peculiarities in everything you look for. Sorry, we mentioned about the 100-year rule. Just dropping back to the 1841, which was a basic census. You've all seen, possibly you've all seen the 1841 census, yeah? It's a yes-no census, isn't it? Were you born in this parish? Yes. No. But it didn't tell you where you were born if it was a no. So not always helpful, but really it was just one step further on from being a head count because they hadn't devised anything better. Yes, some of the trades were put in, but this part here is where it becomes difficult. They were given permission to round up and down ages. And the 1841 census, you were allowed 5 years. So not always helpful when you're looking for a person with a specific known age. Not always possible. Many parishes, Scottish, many Welsh parishes missing, so it wasn't comprehensive. And yeah, I know that causes a lot of difficulty. It does, when you're intent on doing good research and you can't identify parishes. But this is unfortunate, and I know James has got an incident to come to with when we're talking about the actual record book itself. You know, all the record books that are compiled at parish churches in this county and in others all finish up with the county record office. But many in the early days were never handed in, and I would guess that applies to a lot of the Welsh ones. Some were forgotten to be handed in. I won't say it was malicious, but you've got what you have got. In other words, the Records Office have only got those books which are handed in. But, there's a but, as usual. The curates, rectors and vicars, they were responsible for buying them in the first place. So they would use, there was no consistency about the use. They'd fill up every available space on a record book. And, well, it's costing them money every time they renewed it. So the dates were never consistent. A record from this parish, a record from that parish would be totally different, and many, many years different. So you can't always research one without having to look through three to find one for dates. Another difficult acceptance. But what is important about that is it really is important to try and establish the parish church to start with. At least you can either count it in or out, discount it when you're looking for a record. So people forget about that, often forget about that it's most important. The parish church gives you that information. And of course, drifting back to the last lecture we did, you've got the problem there, of course, of going back to the 16th century. A lot of those records are in Latin. So I hope your Latin is good. But we have done a lecture on ink of the time. Ink fades, different types of ink, ochre, whatever. But all the things that you have to get through on a parish record that's been copied, you can trip over these little things like, I can't read it because of the ink. That's the way it is, unfortunately. Right, thank you, Sarah. Okay. 1851 census, yes, we're starting to get changes. I won't go through the whole of this, but for the first time, they've realised that we had many, many people that lived on ships in the Navy, and they were never included in previous census. So, you know, anything that looked stationary in a harbour or wherever, they went and took the details. Now, I say that about the Navy, but there's another word there of institutions. Well, you know what that was. Hulks, prison hulks. So you've got ships or prison hulks containing prisoners, no previous census done, and now they're included. So that's, again, it's a memory bank one, that it may not be a military or naval person on the census for a hulk, but it could be a prisoner. Okay. Yeah, next one. I put this, I thought it was quite amusing. Widford in Chelmsford, that parish record book is missing for the same reason. Somebody's forgotten to hand it in, and that's been lost to history. But also, I did think this was funny. The Great and Little Sark and Le Marchand in the Channel Islands. First time somebody said, "Oh, actually, we're responsible for the Channel Islands. We better start getting census done by them." Missing, of course, they done Alderney, Alderney, Guernsey, and Jersey, and missed others. But anyway, it's just people's knowledge and the way it's evolved. This one's perhaps interesting about access to Army Index. Now, in our first lecture, there was a whole panel we completed of the army at war from this country. Much to everybody's surprise, mine when I first done it, I couldn't believe how many wars, battles, or fights, call them what you may, that we were in or involved with. Particularly, you know about the Crimea, yes, but India, Boer War, etc. There's a whole string of them where British forces were fighting in these conflicts. So again, some interesting things to just think about when you can't find somebody that might just be able to identify they were military. It's where they might be at that particular time. And this is the first census that picked them up. So that was useful. And then we suddenly realised, oh yes, Gibraltar's one of ours as well. So we better start sending census over to them, which we did. So, you know, again, turn it on its head. If you're looking for somebody that you knew might be in Gibraltar, particularly forces again, before 1871, they didn't have a census, so you don't know. Okay, the 1881, yeah, we've now got the Royal Navy taking the census for their responsibility for their vessel and the people on board. So that's it. But, and there always is a but, isn't there? You forget about HMS training facilities, shore-bound training facilities. They're all given vessel names. They're all given ship names. So you can be looking for a ship, can't find it. It might be land-based. You just don't think about it until you actually come across it. So you've got to start looking at land-based naval institutions. They are there. But again, you can just get misled. You can just get misled. And this is about, you know, researching. I didn't put any particular names up against it, but there are many that are listed. The 1891 census was one of the first really that actually totaled up the population that had responded to the census. So we're starting to get a knowledge of how many people lived in the country. And yeah, the changes included also numbers of rooms that were occupied. And it's interesting because everything's got an obverse to it. In the 16th century, we started things called tax. Sorry, I'll rephrase that. We had things called tax. And you may have heard of the hearth tax and the window tax. It's not dissimilar here. Rooms were taxed. So modern politicians are only copying something that King John started in 1215 when he started to put a tax to fund the future armies of Britain. And that's when he linked surnames. So Peter the Fletcher, Peter the Smith, Peter the black or white Smith, etc. And he put the names together because he said one Peter could pay the tax. But then they started to put the surname together, and now they've got 7 Peters. And that's quite cute, that one from King John, quite cute. So don't blame Maggie Thatcher or anything like that for introducing the poll tax. It existed in the 13th century. Okay, thanks, love. Yeah, 1901 census, again, a 3 million jump there. Some other, generally speaking, the basic. There was very little basic change to that one. Again, another one that I put in there, the village of Deal. Well, you should have put the town of Deal, but that's how it was described, the village of Deal. And that was a classic case of the census was taken, but somebody lost the book. There's nothing more you can say. Whether they did it on purpose or not, no idea. But whether they were paid to lose it, who knows. But you have all of these reasons. The 1911 census, a complete redesign. You have seen copies. Have you seen copies of the 1911 census structure? I love the word that I didn't put it up there, so I don't want to offend anybody, but I will say it. And that is the person an imbecile? And you could think that of anybody doing the census. Are they an imbecile? But that's by the by. But at least it had some very useful information. And again, I say I won't read that all out, but it is on the handout. Lots of helpful information. The most helpful, of course, is the number of children that have been born in the marriage at that time. But that tells you how many are alive at the time of the census, and that is useful. Of course, it doesn't tell you those that are born after, but you can start putting things together for that family. I like the fact you've got good professions. The description or descriptors of professions comes out a little bit more, so that's good. Sorry. What you can trip over now. Everybody seems to say, and I think it's true to a degree, everybody has a little bit of trouble with Irish ancestry. And that is a case of, well, they do things slightly different. They definitely do things by parish. So you need that as a background, that background knowledge of parish. But they also didn't start as early as we did. They've got registry offices just the same now, so you can approach them. But there are differences. And of course, then you've got the Northern Ireland difference. So kept differently, but they may be the same people that just moved around the country there. So it's not an easy one, Northern Ireland. And when I'm talking with our friends in California, of course, you can imagine how many have got Irish descent. They just transferred through the country from, east, Midwest, west, and they all want to know their Irish contacts. But anyway, okay, Sarah. Adoption records. Always a good question. People ask, are there records? Yes, there are records, but you do have to make an official approach, and unless you really are intent. What I do when I'm asked to do somebody's family history, I'll just make that point that they are responsible for asking, because if I do it, I'm not always not allowed to get it. That has to be of the family. So. But it's nice to know they are there, and I do get asked that question: how do we get adoption certificates? Okay. The little nuances in census. You've seen on some, I've no doubt you may have seen on some certificates, the term of full age. Yeah? Of full age. Well, yes, at the time, generally, that full age was of 21 years before you had permission just to do everything on your own. But they reduced it to 18. And then, of course, they made quite a sensible decision later to say, well, the age will be put on the certificate. So, now you get of, let's say, 22 years, 18 years or whatever. So, and then, of course, you still got this problem that we had a discussion about at the last presentation, was illiteracy. Illiteracy in the context that we didn't start educating formally the people of the country, whether it be children or others, until quite late on in the 19th century. So it didn't go into the school curriculum. 1880, that sort of period of time, 1890 fully, something like that. So there was a high amount of illiteracy. And of course, that you still trip over it now, occasionally. But did you know, I like this one again. From quite some time, you had by law 42 days to register a birth, death, or marriage. Have you? Yeah. So that I'm pleased you said that as well, because again, you can work out the basis that if somebody forgets to do it, so be it. They've forgotten to do it. It doesn't alter the fact of it happening. So whether they get their hand slapped or wrist slapped, I shouldn't say, but it trips you over, doesn't it? Because I like, I'll point out to that for the sake of argument, though, Q4 in 1 year could be Q2 in the following year. So you can make a mistake of saying, well, there's my person, but he was born in the wrong year and the wrong time. Well, the registration trips you up that way. So, that's where it's important to know the actual date of birth. Then you can work out that they disregarded the 42 days and just did it whenever. So.
His wife's dad. Can't get no records of him. So we've approached him, soon knows all about it.
Yeah.
Got turned out three times by the registrars. Couldn't find a date of birth. Got the quarter, fourth quarter, so we went backwards. Got his mother's maiden name, siblings, etc. Yes, it was registered. His birthday was different to what everybody thought it was.
Yeah.
He was born in the second quarter.
Yeah.
6 months difference, 5 months difference.
That's right. I've been refused as well, and because you think, oh, I got the quarter wrong. So be it. It cost me, what was it, how much refund they give you? £3.50 or £7.50, I can't remember. But yeah, I've done it. I've got it wrong on information given. So, it comes back, doesn't it? It always comes back. Prove what you say, prove what you think. Then you stand a chance. But Another thing, I'll wait till we get to death. You can be married twice, can't you? Not to two different husbands or spouses, two different religions. So that's another thing that you've got to think of. What was the religion? And I'm not going to say any more than that, but you can go to Church of England and a Catholic ceremony and have two certificates, and they can be different in time. Well, it will be different in time. So what you think is a marriage and know the detail of, suddenly there's another marriage, and you think, oh well, I'll discard that. But hold on, it's the same person or same people, just two different religions. That's another little thing that you can trip over on. Again, when you look back, keep going back, you think, 3? Marriage at 3? No, it can't be right. It's dead right. Because they went for betrothals in that period. So, an aristocracy betrothal would enable it to be registered to say, well, my daughter, age 3, is betrothed to marry this person who's age 7 or something like that. So it can trip you up. You can see it's totally the wrong person, but it's not. You've got to understand the difference between dates of birth and betrothals. And there's plenty of incidents of it, especially with the aristocracy, especially. With respect to ladies present, in the 19th century, the bride was always younger than the spouse. So, no reason, just always, generally 2 years younger than the spouse, the husband. You have to go back and prove that that was wrong by finding her date of birth. Many times you're going to find that. So it's one of those nuances that was then done. And you're fully aware that the vicar, the rector, doesn't fill up the certificate at all. He just signs it on the day. That's done by the verger, church wardens, or whomever. So have they got the right information? No, not always. And I always like to say to yourselves, I'll say, always look at the writing on that. Always look at the writing, because the signature often is totally different to the form that is filled in. And that's only because of the fact they like to fill in the forms for the vicar to carry out the ceremony, pass it over. Weddings that have not happened, they're in the book, and you look through a register, there's gaps, not signed off. But they've left the certificate in the book because, two page, they've left it in there because they've forgotten to take it out to say didn't happen. But you look at it, there's no signature of it happening from the vicar. So you have to think, actually, look to that one, it didn't happen. And you guarantee you'd be right in thinking that as well. So
is that the same on bands, when the bands have been read?
The register for banns is, in theory, different to the register of the marriage. Right. The register of the marriage, as you know, would have a certificate copy on that is presented to the Records Office. The register of banns goes back further. Sorry, let me rephrase that. I'll rephrase that. The register of banns happens. Now, if you go back and interrogate the register, you'll see that there's a slight change in some of the records of banns, like up to 1813, something like that, 1813, I think, there were 4 entries on a page. After 1813, there were 3. Okay. After 1837, became a national registration. Okay. The bands went back further than that, but on one of them it will say married on as well.
Yes, but I've got found that we've got the bands.
Yep.
Yeah. 1, 2.
Yep.
No marriage.
Yeah.
Whatever happens at that point, you can't find it.
No. Well,
just assumed they was married. We found one of the later census, a married couple, but no documentation.
Yeah. Well, you can imagine. Well, with our experience and our knowledge, you can imagine why somebody's forgotten to fill it in.
Yeah.
Simple as that. When you're doing it consecutive weeks, if that person isn't there for the consecutive weeks, the next person comes in, doesn't know what he's doing. Sorry, I don't quite mean doesn't know what he's doing. Just forgets that he's got to fill in that thing. That the third week of the bands were read. But previously there was also the one with it that was on that date they were married as well. So it may not be a different on the third week. It may be the marriage week as well. Okay. I like. Sorry, I'll just say that it's exactly what we're saying. On a marriage certificate, that you get normally the 2 witnesses, which are useful when you're doing research to find that they're the same family. Yeah. But you'll find many marriages that nobody's turned up from the families. So the vicar or rector, curate just pulls people in. And I guarantee that I found this. One was a church warden of the church, of the parish church. So, you're around, come here, I want you to witness a wedding. So they're not always guaranteed to be siblings or something like of the family. Generally, yes, but occasionally you get tripped over on that. Sorry, sir. Well, we know about what parish records keep, but look at what they don't have on them. On death certificates, no names of the person reporting the death. No cause of death. Generally excepting, you will get a coroner's comment if it's a coroner's license to bury. So in this area, Shoeburyness to Pitsea, you've got a hell of a lot of people that were drowned, unknown people that were drowned. A hell of a lot. A lot of them in the Shoebury area is where they jump ship. So these are naval personnel. Used to think they could get out of the Navy because they were pressed by jumping ship, and of course they drowned. So that's a whole new understanding of what a death certificate might also trip you up on. Not all parishes had churchyards, so that's another issue. You know the church that the service was held at. You don't know where he's buried. Pre-cremation, they may not have a churchyard. So you've got communal, you've got council churches, churchyards, so there may not be a churchyard associated with the church. It's something just to bear in mind about. And of course, this is classic, isn't it? You mentioned earlier, what do you need to register a death? Good enough. It's normally a tripartite, isn't it? Somebody knows of the death, such as a hospital, etc. And that's recorded at the register office. You go in and report. So it's generally a tripartite reporting of a death. So the registrar can legitimately put the details down. What are you asked? You're asked, when was he born? Oh, well, I know his birthday. guarantee you're going to be a couple of years out if they don't know with the actual year. Now, everybody can remember birthdays, but you don't legally need to take a birth certificate to a death. You just do it from memory. That happens. That happens a lot. Institutions again are a problem there. But anyway, we've covered that. Thanks, Sarah. Stillbirths, again, a difficult situation, but you can get information. Again, you're required generally to be directly linked to the family. Otherwise, you might just get turned down. Adoptions we've gone through, separate index of adoptions. Again, they generally want family to request. So sometimes it can be a little bit difficult when you've been asked by the family to do the family history and you can't access the little bit of information that you need. Okay. Now, I like this one. It's not meant in a derogatory sense. Information on soldiers killed in World War I or World War II. I chose to say that rather than knowing how many soldiers we lost over the previous 100 years in many battles, wars, wherever in the world. But what do you know about World War I and World War II? Generally speaking, you know that there is in existence the Commonwealth war graves. Yeah? Generally a good source of getting information if they have the record. So they're constantly, as I say, I think in the handout, they're constantly updating things, and with your help when you find out something that's slightly askew. So it's useful. You can find out most things there. But all you get, generally speaking, killed in action or died of wounds. If you're in the First World War, you've got access to the war diaries, which are very good in the First World War, except for anything below the rank of a warrant officer, they're not named. But you might get a name of a warrant officer or above named in the war diary on how they died, where they died at the moment of their death in battle. Very useful. Now, I'm going to digress slightly because I was doing some research in World War II. And I discovered, unfortunately, this to the shame of the country at the time, we gave up Singapore. And the Japanese imperial forces used what we call prisoners of war for a couple of other reasons. They used them to build the Burma-Thailand Railway. You've heard about that, I'm sure. And they also took them to Japan itself. And they were used in all of the manufacturing factories of Japan, some of which we now know and buy all of their goods. I can cite Mitsubishi, I can cite a lot of them. Okay, that's one thing. They're not prisoners of war according to Japan, of course, because Japan never signed the Geneva Convention. So in theory, you'll always find that the fact that the Japanese paid them a very small pittance so that they were not called, classed in any way, shape or form, prisoners of war. They were just keeping the manufacturing process of the country going. Anyway, I slightly digress that to come back to the fact of death or killed or died in action, died of wounds. We, in the latter end of the war, bombed Japan. And we killed many, many Allied people, Americans, Dutch, English, mainly the Norfolks, regiment of Norfolk, we killed them, okay? So you're not going to find much about that. Anyway, when I dug deep, really deep, I learnt something about that. The Japan I'm talking about. I'm not talking about the Burma Railway. Japan had no doctors. Basically, all of the doctors in Japan were with their armed forces. So the POW doctors were English or American. And they did one very, very clever is not the right word, but it'll suit. They documented privately the cause of death of all of those prisoners in Japan. These were secreted out, and I did some research. I've got them, virtually got every one. And it's quite frightening because the deaths were generally malnutrition related, but there were also murders, beheaded. They're all mentioned on this research that I've done, and so it's not very nice. But at least for once, I can say this of a World War II Allied prisoner, we actually know the cause of death. Generally, it was some form associated with malnutrition, but there were serious cases of murder, very serious. So it leads on to something we were talking about earlier. Again, I slightly digress. The guillotine. What do you think? I won't say what do you know about the guillotine, but what do you think about the guillotine? Was it used for a short time, long time, or what? But I'll jump right to the end. I think I'm right in saying the guillotine was last used in 1971 in France. In the Second World War, it was certainly used by the Germans in Spandau, and they beheaded, well, they used that against Slavs. They didn't use it against what we would call Western people, but Slavs. 1970, thanks, James. So it's quite a modern invention, and of course, Joseph Ignace Guillotine didn't invent it. He was only the doctor in France at the Revolution saying it's the best humane way of killing people. But 200 years ago, we had it in Halifax. We were trying to get rid of Yorkshire people.
We've lost the presentation.
Sorry?
We've lost the presentation.
We've lost the presentation. Okay, right.
Bear with me.
No, it's all right. I can read the script. Could I borrow a script just for a moment? Save getting my computer out. It's all on mine as well. Right. Oh yes. How many of you have interrogated or investigated something in the Old Bailey records? It's free online. It's free online. It's a good source of documented trial evidence, transcribed as well as the original. So you've got from 1670. Right.
1674.
Sorry? 1674 to 1913. That's good, Sarah. Well done. Those records are online. So again, you would interrogate them just in case you've got any member of the family or links. Have you seen them? Have you ever bothered to go in? Well, it's free online. It's there. Yeah. Old Bailey records will come up. And it is fascinating. It really is. Because they're proper trials transcripts. And when you go back with it, what people were, shall we say, transported for, you'd be amazed, you know. And I say that as the last part that I think we're dealing with. It's the last bit. So we transported to America. We wanted to expand the colonies of America, and they were being transported for what you would laugh at. They wouldn't even get a magistrate's court these days, but they were transported generally for 7 years, so on. And we sent roughly 52,000 to the Americas. And I'm always asked to find these links by the American people. We mentioned about Ventura, and they're always asking, because the way their country populated was from east, Midwest to west. And of course, the opposite happened the other way around. In the west, the Chinese came. And so you have to work all of these things out to answer their questions. Unfortunately, we learnt in the 1773 that the people we were transporting were fighting the English. And that includes families. Sons or fathers were transported to America. We take a force over there, 9,000 plus or whatever, and they're fighting against us with their own families. It's the way of the world. And the first part of the Australian change, when we decided we were going to repopulate Australia, or populate Australia now, to Van Diemen's Land, that was interesting, because they used to sail to Western Australia, these days Fremantle or Perth, go round to Van Diemen's Land, drop off. Then they went into Sydney to Botany Bay afterwards. That was chosen. So that's how we decided that we would populate Australia. And I do get questions on that as well from them. And one thing that's turned up in our recent work here with Sue was understanding the American side of things, the American situation of transportation, where we included Bermuda. We populated Bermuda through transportation. And the why was we wanted a naval base there. So we sent workers, predominantly Irish, to Bermuda to build a new naval dockyard. And that was, ironic in one sense that.
Sorry about the time. Is it all right if I join in?
Sue's got the sheet.
Time for tea.
Yeah.
You're being time for tea.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So,
You go to Southend. Back.
so
I'll grab one of these chairs.
yeah. So, in your thoughts when you are doing this research, just widen the reasoning out of what you know, but just say, well, I'll have a look at, shall we say, the Old Bailey. Because as the algorithm changed enormously, as you went back in time, it was enormous amount of transportation. You'll be amazed how many times you pick up some family member. Or the good thing, if they weren't transported, you'll pick up the trial and that information. So anyway, the last screen. If you've got any questions, you can always ask Sarah. So any issues so far? Sorry? Pardon?
Were you trying to help us to find somebody else?
Was I trying to help you to?
Now, will you help us to find?
Oh, certainly.
Find out something?
Yeah, certainly. If you've got a question, can I say this? Can I say this? Could you go through Sue to ask your question? She will send it on to me. Do it that way, because that's good publicity for the library. But yes, I mean, we've got one case. You don't know what's coming, do you? No. You will shortly. We've helped this lady do a little bit more research. Sue will no doubt speak to you. She was just in there preparing the tea, which is the right thing.